Hello, everybody. We are going to give people about a minute to get on with us, and then we will get started. Right now, you can take a moment, just make sure you have your spiral with you. And then in about 1 minute, we will get started with our review. Remember, we are covering the Declaration of Independence and the battles of the American Revolution and the um, uh, people of the American Revolution. So everything about the American Revolution. I'll give it about 1 more minute. Super play, the only dates you have to remember are the hot dates, but you do need to know the order in which things occur. And you do need to know that there's 2 treaties of Paris and they have separate dates. Leo, you have a test on Friday. I am doing the live today because tomorrow is Halloween and I do not want to do a live review on Halloween at 6:30 p.m. The test is on Friday. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with the Declaration of Independence. We covered this last week. Declaration of Independence is a hot date. That date is 1776. Story of the Declaration of Independence. It's at the Second Continental Congress. They are meeting to discuss Sparky. Things from the previous units are always fair game. They're meeting to discuss what to do after the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So one of the things that's important to remember is that the Declaration of Independence actually comes after the Battle of Lexington and Concord at the Second Continental Congress. And the way we taught this to y'all and the little booklet that y'all got, there are 4 major symbols that you can there are 4 major symbols that you can use to help remember the Declaration of Independence and its parts. Okay. So the 4 major symbols for the Declaration of Independence, so once again, happens after the battles of Lexington and Concord at the Second Continental Congress. The year is 1776. That is a hot date. You are expected to memorize that. So the first thing you want to remember is the breakup, the broken heart. And you just want to remember that the Declaration of Independence is a breakup letter. And that's all it is a breakup letter. It is not a government. It doesn't say who's in charge. It doesn't say how things are going to be run. It's just a breakup letter. It says, Britain, we are independent from you now. The second thing is the unalienable rights. We call him withdrawal alien. His name is LLP. Okay. And LLP stands for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unalienable rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is actually important that you be able to and know what those 3 unalienable rights are. Okay. And then the grievances. Okay, the grievances. These are the list of complaints, the things that we are angry about, the reason that we are breaking up with Britain. Those are the grievances. So things like you taxed us without representation, you were doing the quartering of soldiers, you were not giving us fair trials. Those are all examples of grievances. And then the last thing we remember about this is John Hancock had the biggest signature. There were 56 total people who signed this, but John Hancock has the biggest signature. So those are our 4 symbols of the Declaration of Independence. Again, the broken heart, the alien named LLP, the angry G, which is the grievances, the complaints, and the large signature, the John Hancock. And just to remember, the primary author is Thomas Jefferson. So you kind of want to remember that it's written by Thomas Jefferson. He is the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. Okay. All right. So after the Declaration of Independence, the war starts really splitting into sides, and I just want to look at those two sides that are going to be facing off in the war. Obviously, you have the Patriots, that's the United States, our side, the side we like, that has the Continental Army. Remember, we say Continental, United States, etc. And they fought for independence. The positives that they had were that they knew the land, they had a frontier fighting style. They were, and they got help from Britain's enemies. So they don't have a lot going for them, but the advantages they have are major advantages. Okay. And then the negatives are they had no money, they had no resources, they had fewer men, and they had no navy. So those are their negatives. On the other side, you have the Loyalists. We call them the losers because they're going to lose the war, the Loyalist losers. They support the British. Okay. And they have a larger population. They have more money. They have more resources. They have more soldiers. And they have the best navy. Their negatives are that they are overconfident. They're far from home. They fought and marched in lines. And there were these bright red uniforms that were easy to pick out. So those are the two sides of the battle, the Patriots who fought for independence and the Loyalists who supported Britain. Okay, so those are the two sides that we see. Who knows? I did not make a Quizlet review. Again, you are more than welcome to search my name on Quizlet, Amy Foster-Munoz, and see if there is a Quizlet review from last year, but I did not make a Quizlet specifically for this. Leanne, you need to get a general, I wouldn't say you need to necessarily memorize all of them, but you need to have a general idea of the strengths and weaknesses, and you need to understand that the British side had significantly more strengths. Like if you looked at it on a piece of paper, you would guess that the British side was going to win. The continental side, the American side, had fewer advantages. They just ended up being really important advantages. So then American Revolution, we have the battles and the events of the American Revolution. Okay, so obviously, and we go back in time a little bit to the Treaty of Paris of 1763, which ends the French and Indian War and is going to signal the end of salutary neglect. And remember, salutary neglect, we like to think of Britain with their sunglasses on. I'm not paying attention to you. Salutary neglect is the idea that the salutary neglect is the idea that Britain is not paying attention to what the colonies are doing. So the colonies get this expectation that they're allowed to do whatever they want. So it's like, well, there's some rules, but nobody's enforcing the rules. Like you're getting to do whatever you want. You're being tardy to class and you're not getting consequences. And then suddenly somebody comes in and is going to start enforcing all of the rules. Okay. All right. So someone's going to come in and start enforcing all of the rules. And so that's when salutary neglect ends, that's what happens. All right. So 1763, ending of salutary neglect. Then we have all of those taxes and everything, and we get angry about that. Ends up leading to the battles of Lexington and Concord. After the battles of Lexington and Concord is the Declaration of Independence. Okay, where you have Great Britain and the USA breaking up. After that, you have the Battle of Trenton, which is the surprise attack. Show that with a little surprise face. Okay, where Washington crossed the Delaware River. And then after that, you have Saratoga, which is the turning point. And that's where the French are going to come and start helping us. After Saratoga, you have Valley Forge. Okay, which is, it was, remember, it was cold and there was no food, but they spent the whole time training, so it ended up being good. Okay, and then you have Yorktown. Okay, which is the last battle where the British were surrounded. And then you have 1783, the Treaty of Paris of 1783, where Britain has to recognize the United States as a country. Okay. So once again, that timeline. Okay, so it starts with 1763 with the end of salutary neglect. Remember, salutary neglect is the idea that we should get to do whatever we wanted. Remember, salutary neglect makes us happy. Mercantilism makes us mad. Salutary neglect makes us happy. Mercantilism makes us mad. So when salutary neglect ends, that's very upsetting for us. Then you have the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Okay, the Declaration of Independence, the Battle of Trenton, Battle of Saratoga, Valley Forge, Yorktown, and then the Treaty of Paris of 1783. Okay, and remember we had the strategy that we do, LSY, Lexington, Saratoga, Yorktown, to help you remember the order of those three major battles. Okay, Lexington, Saratoga, Yorktown. First battle, turning point, last battle. Lexington, Saratoga, Yorktown. Okay, and just remember Valley Forge was cold. There was no food because they didn't have any resources. Okay, so they didn't have boots, they didn't have weapons. They were lacking in resources because, as we saw on their negative for the Patriots, they didn't have any. They didn't have any resources. They didn't have any supplies. So they end up going to Valley Forge and being really cold and not having any food. Okay. The Battle of Lexington and Concord is the very first battle. It's also called the Shot Heard Round the World. And basically the British were going to Concord to try to take some guns from the colonists who were like stockpiling these weapons, and they wanted to take the weapons away from them. And they get to Lexington, and there's a group of militia. And remember, the colonists are they're militia. Okay, and the militia tries to stop them, and the British and militia end up shooting at each other. It's called the Shot Heard Round the World, and it is the first battle of the American Revolution. Okay, the first battle of the American Revolution. So let's talk about some of the people. Now, some of the people, as we've been doing our station rotations and you've been going through the people station, I'd like to point out that some of the people are repeats from the last unit, from Causes of the American Revolution. So, for instance, Mercy Otis Warren, who is a playwright and a writer. Yeah, let me go back real quick. 1763 and 1783. They end two different wars. The entire purpose of a peace treaty is to end a war. So the peace treaty of 1763 ends the French and Indian War. And remember, after the French and Indian War, the British were in a lot of debt. They owed a lot of money, so they're gonna end salutary neglect. They're gonna increase mercantilism. So and they're gonna start taxation without representation. The Treaty of Paris of 1783 ends the American Revolution. So ends the French and Indian War, ends the American Revolution. And once the American Revolution is over, then Britain must recognize the United States as a free, sovereign, and independent country. Sovereign is a word that means like ruling. Like popular sovereignty means the people rule, the people are in charge. Sovereign equals ruling, in charge of. So if they say we are a sovereign country, it means we're in charge of ourselves. So it means that Britain is no longer in charge of us. We are a free, independent, sovereign country. All right. Okay, so people of the American Revolution. Like I said, some of these are repeats from the other one. So you're going to start with Mercy Otis Warren. We use this as strategy. Warren is a writer. Mercy Otis Warren, she writes plays and poems to help convince people to stay a part of the American Revolution. Okay. And then we got T-Pain. He writes Common Sense. And I like to tell my students, you have to like T-Pain. It's only common sense. T-Pain is only common sense. The British didn't hate the colonists. They just wanted money. I mean, they don't hate the colonists. They just want money from them. So every time the British pass a tax, then the colonists boycott that item, which affects trade. But in general, the colonists don't have a lot of choice about who to trade with. The only people they're allowed to trade with under mercantilism is Britain. That's why mercantilism makes us mad, is because it's restricting our trade. It's restricting how we can make money. But that's like saying your parents hate you because they want you to do chores. You might not want to do chores, but that doesn't mean your parents hate you. And you might be like, it's not fair that I have to do chores when you're not giving me any money. And you might eventually try to become independent from your parents so you don't have to do chores anymore. But that's really what it's like. You have to think of Britain kind of like a parent, and the colonies are kind of like teenagers, and they don't want to live at home anymore. Okay. So, and then we've got, let's see, George Washington. He's the leader of the Continental Army. And his counterpart that we talk about is General Cornwallis. Who's leader of the British Army. And remember, told my students today, I was going to start calling him Sandy Cornwallis. Okay. So, like, because he lost, he loses at Yorktown, because he goes to somewhere where we can surround him. Okay. So George Washington is leader of the Continental Army. General Cornwallis is the leader of the British Army, and we like to call him Candy Cornwallis. And we got very bright. Okay. And he loses at Yorktown. He loses at Yorktown. Okay. Yeah. John Hancock is the biggest signature on the Declaration of Independence. So, real quick, just review of our Declaration of Independence. These are our 4 things. John Hancock's signature is the biggest one. Why? Because he wanted everyone to know that he cared a lot about independence. I don't know. Go back in time and ask him. We just know he did it. He was like, you know what? If I'm going to sign the Declaration of Independence, I'm going to give it the biggest signature that I can. All right. Abigail Adams. Wife of John Adams. Famously says, remember the ladies. She's writing him a letter and she's talking about stuff. And she wants women to have more rights in their new government. Okay. Remember the ladies, Abigail Adams. Then my personal favorite, and most of y'all's, JPJ, John Paul Jones. Father of the American Navy. Famously said, I have not yet begun to fight. Pirate and dude who's totally going to steal your boat. John Paul Jones, father of the American Navy. Somebody gave me pretty colored pens, so now everything's in multiple colors. You have James Armistead. Who is a spy and a slave. Yes, exactly, Rain. Okay, so you have James Armistead, spy and slave. I agree, Leanne. John Paul Jones is better than Jack Sparrow. Also, John Paul Jones, real person. So, waiting for the movie to come out. So, once again, we got Mercedes Warren is a writer. T-Pain, you got to like T-Pain. It's just common sense. George Washington is leader of the Continental Army. Candy Cornwallis, leader of the British Army and all-around loser at Yorktown. James Armistead, the spy and slave. John Paul Jones. Well, Johnny Depp can play John Paul Jones in the movie. John Paul Jones, father of the American Navy. You can imagine him being played by Johnny Depp because it's John Paul Jones, Johnny Depp, father of the American Navy. See who else I want to make sure we include. Oh, my goodness, I almost forgot our Marquis de Lafayette. He is French and he is a volunteer. Okay. That's fine, Farah. Okay, so Marquis de Lafayette, he is a French volunteer. He comes and volunteers for the Continental Army. Another throwback, this gentleman we've now talked about in 3 different units. Okay. Benjamin Franklin. You should have an idea about him. You think about a light bulb because he discovers electricity, right? Okay, I'm attempting to draw a light bulb. It's failing miserably, but he does the Albany Plan of Union. Okay, Benny Frank, Albany Plan of Union. Okay. Did Cornwallis. Okay. I think that's everyone. Yeah, that's everyone we really want to focus on for tomorrow, Friday's test. Okay, so those are our people: Mercy Otis Warren, Thomas Paine, George Washington, General Cornwallis, James Armistead, John Paul Jones, Benny Frank, and the Marquis de Lafayette. Okay. Okay. Benjamin Franklin could also have a movie about him. He was a pretty interesting guy. Discovers electricity, invents bifocals, diplomat to France, helps convince France to join the war after Saratoga. Okay. So pretty important guy. I just want to revisit the. I did not mention Leanne. Yes, he was kind of a big partier. Some of that part of his life might not be appropriate for school, but it would make an interesting movie. I did not talk about von Steuben. Oh, we can add the Hessians though. That would be a good. That's just kind of a vocab word / person. Honestly, the Hessian. But well, people think they're funny. So the Hessians. I was going to add the Hessians. I got sidetracked. So von Steuben, General von Steuben, is the guy who is the German guy who yelled at us in German until we figured out how to be an army. I cannot tell you whether or not he will be on the test. I'm telling you that I'm not emphasizing him for this review. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. Hessians, on the other hand, are the German mercenaries who fought for the British. People tend to get confused because there's there's a German guy named von Steuben, and then there's the Hessians who are German. You want to make sure you understand the Hessians are on the side of the British. Von Steuben is on the side of the Americans. Okay. So that I went ahead and added some Hessians there. Yes, the Hessians were paid to fight. They are mercenaries. So they fight for anybody who can pay them. They'll fight for anybody who can pay them. Paid mercenaries, yep. And one more time, I know I already went over this, but I just want to review it again. Okay. And that's when we did our notes on the battles of the American Revolution in the bottom right-hand corner, we made a mini anchor chart with the L, S, and the Y. So I just want to reiterate that one more time as a pretty important strategy to use on the test. to help remember the order of those battles. So even though you don't need to know the dates of any of those battles, it is really important that you know the battles. Okay, so Lexington is the first one. Saratoga is the turning point, because after Saratoga is when the French join. You guys, it's not because we're just so good we suddenly start winning all the battles, okay? The reason it's the turning point is because after Saratoga, the French join. And then they help us win in Yorktown by helping us surround the British. So Lexington and Concord, there's no French. The French join after Saratoga, and then they help us by surrounding the British at Yorktown. So Lexington, Saratoga, Yorktown. Okay, and the Treaty of Paris is the end of that, and Treaty of Paris forces the British to recognize the United States as a free and independent country. I mean, Saratoga's in New York. No tundra involved. Remember, Saratoga is the one where there's the 3 British generals, and they come up with this plan that they're all going to meet in Saratoga and surround the colonists, the Continental Army. But one of them is a week late, and one of them wandered off, and then the one guy shows up by himself with his army, and we end up surrounding him and winning. Super play, these are the items that I am reviewing in this review. Valley Forge is the winter one. That's right. Valley Forge is the winter one where it's cold and they don't have any shoes and they have no resources and they don't have any food. But the positive thing that happens is that they end up training. So they spend the entire winter training and become a really good fighting force. Okay, so they spend the entire winter training and become a really good fighting force. Okay, so again, end of French and Indian War, Lexington and Concord, shot heard around the world, Declaration of Independence, the surprise attack at Trenton, which was on Christmas. Remember, that's a Christmas surprise attack. Saratoga is the turning point because then the French join. Valley Forge is no resources. Yorktown is the last battle, and then the British have to recognize the United States as independent. Yorktown is the last battle, yes. Okay, we're only at 32 minutes right now, so we can take questions. It's pretty straightforward information and material. You just kind of want to review it and make sure you have the strategies necessary to keep it straight in your head. Okay. It's all good, Rain. So that guy, Thomas, yes, and I'm a very visual person, so I like the symbols. So for me, that looks like that timeline looks like so like if I was going to sit down on a test and try to brain dump really quickly, I might do something like that. Because I think very visually, so I like to have the images and pictures that help me remind things. Okay. Yeah, Sparky, this is just the stuff that I thought it was important to highlight in the video, since I can't reteach 2 weeks worth of information in an hour. Bunker Hill is a lesser battle. It's a small battle. It actually happens right before the Declaration of Independence. It's right outside Boston. And it's really just famous because this is the battle where we don't have, again, we have no resources. So we don't have very much ammo. So one of the commanders in charge says, "Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes." And that phrase becomes really like a kind of a famous phrase. And we only lose Bunker Hill because we run out of bullets. So we have to retreat. So yeah, and Bunker Hill is like a big confidence boost. And that's important. Not like really important. Like it's obviously not important enough to make it on my timeline. But it is important in that the Declaration of Independence is a hard thing to do. Okay, it's really nobody in the world ever has ever gone to the king and said, "Hey, we don't want to be part of your country anymore. You need to just let us leave peacefully because we have the right to rule ourselves and make our own decisions." No one's ever done that before. It's pretty gutsy. The king is supposed to be all powerful, able to do whatever they want, unlimited government. And so for us to do that, we really got to feel confident that we're going to win. And Bunker Hill really kind of helps us out with that. Um, but of course, then we lose a whole bunch right after that. Okay. Luckily, Saratoga happens and that turns it around because then the French are going to help us out. Declaration of Independence is after the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Literally, it takes, like, we start fighting, and then the Second Continental Congress is called because they're like, oh my gosh, like, we just started fighting the British. We just shot at them and we killed a bunch of British soldiers. What are we going to do now? Oh man, are we going to declare independence? Are we going to stay part of Britain? What do we want to do? And so they decide, okay, I'm going to, yeah, exactly, right. They're proud of themselves for just being gutsy. Go for it. I have no resources, don't have very many weapons. The British army is twice as big as my army. But you know what? That's okay. We're declaring independence anyway. And hey, it works out. We win. So the Loyalists are losers. And Candy Cornwallis can go and get trapped at Yorktown. Erica, I can tell you show up at all the lives. You like that, Erica? I just thought of that this year. Candy Cornwallis. Somebody gave me some candy corn and I was eating it and I was like, he's Candy Cornwallis because he loses. He's like candy. Candy Cornwallis. The guy that went to India. Leo, I'm not sure who you're referring to. The guy that went to India. Benjamin Franklin went to France. Franklin, France. They kind of sound the same because he helped the French convince us to join the war. I'm assuming this is something that Mr. Brocken told y'all that I have not shared with my students. The Marquis de Lafayette is from France. He goes back to France. Oh, Cornwallis. It's General Cornwallis. I'm sorry. Yes. After General Cornwallis loses the American Revolution, the British king, King George III, sends him to India to go and fight and take over India. So that's Corny Cornwallis. It's Candy Cornwallis. Candy Cornwallis can't cut it in America, so he goes to India and is a general in India. No, it's actually not punishment. It's because he gets to be in charge of like half of India, but I don't know. It should be a punishment because he lost like a loser, but he doesn't really get blamed for losing, even though he let himself get trapped at Yorktown. Plus, his family's really rich, so I know, right? King George III. Well, to be fair, King George III, not the brightest, crown in the crown box. That's why he's like, we give him a chance, guys. The Second Continental Congress writes to King George III and says, hey, you know what? We don't really want to fight you. So how about you just get rid of these taxes and let us have salutary neglect back so we can do whatever we want and we'll totally stay British subjects and we won't have a war or anything. And King George III is all like, nah, man, bring it. I'll beat you up. You do what I tell you to do. I am the king. You will do what I tell you to do. And the colonists, then the Continental Congress is like, okay, then independence it is. And that turns out really well for us. It goes pretty well. I do want to just highlight one more thing. I can highlight one more thing about James Armistead. I told my students this. James Armistead's sort of an interesting figure because he's a spy and he serves his country, the United States. And he is really good at being a spy. He's our one who's our slave and our spy. And he's a slave, and so he basically gets himself to be a slave for the British general. And because he's a slave, people don't pay attention to him or notice that he's there, really. They kind of ignore him. So he hears all these plans and troop movements and stuff like that. On A, Britain, it's not you, it's us, U.S. Yeah, he's kind of like James Bond. So James Armistead's like James Bond, but he's a slave. And after the war, you would think that he like automatically gets his freedom. Boom, right? Hey, you were a spy for the U.S. Army. You are free now. But no, the Marquis de Lafayette actually writes a letter to George Washington. The Marquis de Lafayette writes a letter to George Washington saying, hey, this guy really worked hard. He was a spy. He did a lot of good stuff for the United States. You should give him his freedom. You need to give him his freedom. And that's why George Washington does it, is because Marquis de Lafayette asks. It's interesting to me that we have this historical figure, James Armistead, who's important. Even though he's a slave, he's an important part of this war. And a French guy has to ask for him to be freed before we give him his freedom. So that's just an interesting note about James Armistead. Spy and slave. James Bond of his time. I'm going to say goodbye to my pizza now.